In tonight's news edition, the Prime Minister pledges more support for Royal Jordanian as the national carrier expects a travel boom with the opening of a new airport terminal. A UN report says settlement violates Palestinian rights and calls for a halt to their expansion. And Syria warns it will respond after an Israeli airstrike near Damascus as the UN chief expresses concern over the reported attack. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the News at 10. A royal decree has deferred Parliament's extraordinary session until February 10. New Boeing 787s will join Royal Jordanian's fleet of 33 aircraft. RJ executives made the announcement as they briefed Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour on the national carrier's plans. They discussed raising the flag carrier's capital to 84 million dinars, in which the government has a 26% stake. Noting RJ's successes that will boost the national economy, Mansour pledged more support for its plans to upgrade services and open new markets and destinations. RJ Board Chairman Nasser Lozi said the company, which celebrates its 50th anniversary this year, has gained a high reputation at local, regional and international levels and will keep up this image. Lozi cited political instability in the region, the global economic crisis, skyrocketing oil prices and rising competition as the chief reason behind slow travel and tourism. RJ Director General and CEO Amr Hadidi said the aviation industry in the kingdom will witness a boom when a new state-of-the-art airport terminal opens this year. Elected Member of Parliament Mohammed Al-Mahsiri, Amman 1st District, died today, a week after parliamentary elections. His death prompts holding a by-election in the East Amman district to fill the vacant seat. The Constitution stipulates that if a House seat falls vacant by the death or resignation of a member, a replacement has to be found in 2 months according to the electoral law. The Elections Commission will oversee the by-election. United Nations human rights investigators said Israeli settlements are a serious violation of international law and Palestinian rights. They called on Israel to stop settlement expansion and withdraw all Jewish settlers from the occupied West Bank. Palestinians welcomed the report, but Israel rejected the report, saying it undermines prospects for a peace deal. Lay Shanqiti has the details.
A new UN damning report against Jewish settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. UN human rights investigators called on Israel to halt settlement expansion and withdraw all 500,000 Jewish settlers from the occupied West Bank. A 3-member UN panel said Israeli practices could be subject to prosecution as possible war crimes. It said private companies should stop working in the settlements if the work adversely affected the human rights of Palestinians and urged member states to ensure companies respected human rights.
Our first recommendation in the line of the Secretary General last report issued on November last year, Israel must, that's our first recommendation, must cease settlements activities and provide adequate, prompt and effective remedies to the victims of violation of human rights.
The settlements are in breach of the 4th Geneva Convention forbidding the transfer of civilian populations into occupied territories and could amount to war crimes that fall under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court.
And looking at the facts, we have given the finding and the conclusions, which say, number one, that the violations that have been carried out seriously impinge upon the self-determination of the Palestinian people. Number two, we are very concerned about the fact that the rights of the child in the Palestinian territory have been violated time and again. Number three, what we have said, as Madam Shane has said, is that it is an offense under international law.
The independent investigators interviewed more than 50 people who came to Jordan in November to testify about confiscated land, damage to their livelihoods, including olive trees, and violence by Jewish settlers. In a letter to the United Nations in December, the Palestinians accused Israel of stepping up settlement building after the Palestinians won UN recognition of statehood. Israel has not cooperated with a probe set up by the Human Rights Council last March to examine the impact of settlements in the occupied territories, including Arab East Jerusalem. Since the 1967 occupation, Israel has established about 250 settlements in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. An estimated 500,000 settlers live in the settlements blocks and outposts dotting the hilly landscape of the West Bank. The UN report said the settlements impede Palestinian access to water and farmlands. After the General Assembly upgraded Palestinian status at the world body, Israel said it would build 3,000 more settler homes. Late Shankiti for the news at 10.
Syria summoned the head of a United Nations mission in the Golan Heights to protest an Israeli air raid on a Syrian military site outside the capital. Damascus described the attack as a violation of a disengagement accord that followed the last major war between the two countries. Syria warned of what it called a possible surprise response. The Arab League and Russia condemned the airstrike, and the UN Secretary General expressed grave concern. Hala Dababne has more on the latest escalation.
Israeli warplanes were in action, striking a military research center near Damascus at dawn. Earlier reports have said the Israeli aircraft had struck a convoy carrying weapons from Syria to Lebanon destined for Hezbollah. State television said 2 people were killed and 5 wounded in the attack on the site in Jamraya. It said the planes crossed into Syria below the radar level just north of Mount Hermon. But diplomats, Syrian rebels and regional security sources said the Israeli planes hit a weapons convoy heading from Syria to Lebanon. The rebels said they, not Israel, hit Jamraya with mortars. Syria insisted the target was a military research center northwest of Damascus. The Syrian National Coalition, the opposition group exiled in Turkey, condemned the attack, calling for lodging a complaint with the UN Security Council.
Now Lebanese has a right to file complaint against Israel in Security Council, as well Syria can do that, as well as maybe the people who has been targeted by this can sue Israel about what they did. We wait for accurate information from here and there to understand the situation. But in general, what has happened is illegal.
In a joint press conference with his Turkish counterpart Tayyip Erdogan, Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati said he did not receive a confirmation of the incident from the military. A Lebanese army statement, however, said several Israeli warplanes violated Lebanese airspace in the past 24 hours. The statement said 4 fighter jets overflew Lebanon's airspace near Naqoura in southern Lebanon and performed maneuvers. Russia said any Israeli airstrike would amount to unacceptable military interference.
We analyze all the information we receive, and if confirmed, then our main conclusion is that it is a very serious breach of the UN Charter. This is an unacceptable action against a sovereign government.
Iran said any attack on Syria is an attack on itself, and Hezbollah also expressed support of the Syrian regime. But Israel remains silent, with little reaction from its Western backers. White House warning to Damascus not to transfer weapons to Hezbollah. Hala Dababne for the news at 10.
Syrian refugees continue to pour across the border into Jordan. An official source at the General Command of the Jordan Armed Forces said about 1,700 Syrians have entered in the last 24 hours. It said rising numbers, many of them entire families, were illegally entering via 4 border points. They included children, women, and elderly, as well as many injured and sick people. The armed forces offered emergency aid to the new arrivals at the makeshift border centers before moving them to the Zaatri refugee camp. In the latest fighting in Syria, attacks continued in Aleppo, Damascus, and Al-Raqqa. The latest video images show smoke and fire filling the streets and people desperately searching for missing children. In a refugee camp in the northern town of Atme, a rapidly growing number of Syrians were seeking refuge. Difficult conditions take over the camp, which houses around 20,000 refugees, especially during the cold winter months. Representatives of 40 Syrian aid and other NGOs gathered in Istanbul to ask the international community for further action to help the people in Syria. Egyptian politicians signed a document pledging to renounce the country's violence. They agreed to set up a committee of politicians from rival groups to deliver a program for further talks. The meeting was convened by the head of Al-Azhar University and Mosque, one of the few institutions still seen as neutral in Egyptian society. Al-Azhar Sheikh told politicians that a national dialogue and the respect for the rule of law is the only tool to resolve any differences. Participants, including Muslim Brotherhood leaders and its secular opponents, described their joint statement as a major step towards ending the crisis. But while the meeting was underway, opposition groups issued a statement calling for demonstrations at the presidential palace in Cairo tomorrow. Liberal politician Mohammed al-Barad'i was optimistic, and others also described the day as historic. They said every party will do what it can with goodwill to build trust again among the country's factions.
We spoke on matters which will follow the document, including dialogue, its goals and guarantees, but not its conditions. There will be a decision-making committee to discuss all of this under the watchful eye of Al-Azhar.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be asked on Saturday to put together a new government. Israeli President Shimon Peres completed talks with 12 parties elected to the Knesset last week. Only center-left Labour ex-Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni, centrist party Hatnua, leftist Meretz and Arab factions, which together controlled 38 of Parliament's 120 seats, did not ask Peres to pick Netanyahu. Peres began the process yesterday when he met representatives of Netanyahu's 31-seat Likud Beitina party, the biggest faction in the next Knesset. He also met Yesh Atid, a new party led by political newcomer Yair Lapid, which won 19 seats. Mali's president has offered to talk to rebels in a bid for national reconciliation. It came as a French-led offensive continues to drive Islamist insurgents into mountainside hideaways. A 3-week ground and air offensive dislodged Al-Qaeda-linked fighters from northern Mali's major towns, ending the first phase of an operation. Farah Ajlouni has more.
After weeks of fighting, French troops have reached the northern Malian town of Kidal, the last urban stronghold held by Islamist insurgents. But adverse weather was slowing the arrival of reinforcements. French military spokesman Thierry Bucquart confirmed the acts of vengeance has been carried by the Malian population. Bucquart said the goal of the French forces was purely to gain control of the airport, while Malian and African forces would concentrate on retaking ground. The French military plans to gradually hand over to a larger African force tasked with rooting out insurgents in their mountain redoubts near Algeria's border. Meanwhile, EU foreign ministers meet in Brussels to speed up their training mission to help the Malian forces and other direct support for the Bamako government.
We're pleased to see the roadmap being put forward. The training mission will be able to report back on the work that's been done so far, that General Lecointre, who's been out in Bamako, and Kristalina Georgieva has been there to gauge what needs to happen in terms of humanitarian support as well. And foreign ministers will be able to look now at what further we should and will be doing.
France has deployed some 4,500 troops in a 3-week ground and air offensive to break the Islamist rebels' 10-month grip on major northern towns. Farah Ajlouni for the news at 10.
Chuck Hagel, President Barack Obama's choice for defense chief, told a skeptical Senate panel that he backs U.S. policy of preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. He also said he supports a strong Israeli military. Critics in Congress have sought to portray Hagel, a former Republican senator, as soft on Iran and anti-Israel. They pointed to past comments that his support
Senator Hagel's record is deeply troubling and out of the mainstream. Too often, it seems, he's willing to subscribe to a worldwide view that is predicated on appeasing our adversaries while shunning our friends.
Australian Open champion Novak Djokovic seemed relaxed as he laughed and signed autographs as he arrived for a training session ahead of Serbia's Davis Cup match against Belgium. Djokovic left Melbourne within hours of beating Andy Murray on Sunday to prepare on clay ahead of the Belgium clash. Djokovic, who helped Serbia win the Davis Cup in 2010, lines up alongside Janko Tipsarevic this weekend. David Beckham is poised to join Ligue 1 club Paris Saint-Germain after leaving LA Galaxy at the end of the Major League Soccer season in December. The former England captain has been training with Premier League club Arsenal to retain his fitness. Saint-Germain are top of Ligue 1 with a squad that features recent signings with Swedish striker Zlatan Ibrahimovic and Brazilian defender Thiago Silva. A snowstorm, the second to hit the kingdom in 2 weeks, blocked roads and brought chaos in southern and northern Jordan. The cold front and low-pressure system began last night, dumping snow on highlands in the south and the northern Ajloun and Jerash heights. Amman streets were flooded by heavy downpours that also hit most areas of the kingdom as Mother Nature brought new hope and dispelled farmers' fears after the past dry years. Amman municipality and the Public Security and Civil Defense Department across the country have upped their readiness to deal with the extraordinary weather. And more on the weather outlook. It will be cold, cloudy and rainy tonight with thunder and hail at times. Snowfall is expected in southern highlands with brisk winds turning gusty at times. Tomorrow it will remain cold and rainy with thundery hail showers and snowfall in southern areas. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a cloudy and rainy day tomorrow with gusty winds and rough seas. The weatherman warns of low visibility due to fog and heavy rain, flash floods in low-lying areas and heavy snowfall in the south. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To close, here's a reminder of our top stories. The Prime Minister pledges more support for Royal Jordanian as the National Courier expects a travel boom with the opening of a new airport terminal. A UN report says settlements violate Palestinian rights and calls for a halt to their expansion. And Syria warns it will respond after an Israeli airstrike near Damascus as the UN chief expresses concern over the reported attack. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.